He's 80, he feels that he can't accomplish anything. And that's where I was in my life. So I'm going to just take you through a path. I was born July 24th, 1949, with 2 siblings. I was raised in Harlem until about the age of 9, and I was bused to an all-white school. So we're going back to the 60s. I was one of the first students to be bused to a white school. I suffered with low self-esteem during this time because I realized that I was poor. You know, coming from Harlem, where I was at, in the radius between 116th, 117th, between Lenox and 5th, was my whole family, grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and we did everything together. So I never realized that we were poor until I stepped into these houses, and they had maid quarters, they had maids, and I went home one day and asked my mother, why am I black? I had a problem with that because they looked like the privileged children. So I had family, but they had stuff. And when you're little, you look at stuff. I suffered with rheumatic fever as a child, so I was hospitalized for a couple of weeks. I saw young kids. There was a little boy that had an old man's disease, and he died right before my very eyes. So I struggled a lot. I was different. I used to talk to myself. I played with perfume bottles. I didn't play with dolls. And I believe the reason I did that is because they were still, and I could move them around like I want. I didn't have to answer to them. I didn't have to get mad with them or angry with them. So I used to tell my kids that. They used to laugh at me. Didn't ride a bike, didn't learn how to swim, didn't like dolls, didn't like comic books. I liked to color. And so I suffered the rheumatic fever. So now I'm in junior high school, and I'm with all these white kids, and growing up, I got teased a lot. You know, we were, back in the 60s, if you were light-skinned, you were on. And if you were dark, you kind of fell to the wayside. So they used to tease me about my lips. They used to tease me about how black I was. They used to call me liver lips, short hair, and they said, oh, the white man never touched your family. So I went through a lot of things growing up. Aside from that, I grew up with an abusive dad who used to beat my mother. And before I forget, let me not forget my brother. He's my brother from another mother. And that's how we grew up. Bishop talked about how back in the days men were allowed to have, you know, it was said that they could have all these women. And so my father was definitely a womanizer. And he used to brutally beat my mom. And that left a lot of scars on me, because to watch your mother get beat down and then also watch him out with all these women was very traumatizing. So now we're in the Bronx. My mother's struggling. My father's in and out of jail. He never really had a job. So when the teachers used to ask us, what does your dad do? Oh, he works construction. That was what we were told to say. So he's in jail. My mother's struggling. We're sharing a pack of Franks and a pound of white potatoes between me, my mother, and my sister. We a can of hash and a half a dozen eggs between me, my mother, and my sister. And then my father comes home. When he comes home, I'm pregnant. What an embarrassment that your father knows that you've been touched. I was 7 months pregnant. He was very violent to the boy. The boy wound up going to jail for statutory rape. And so it was just a mess. So here I am now, turning sweet 16, rocking a baby. And my father, when he came home, we were about to lose our apartment because my mother was struggling with the job. And in 6 months, my dad not only paid up the rent, but he bought the building. While he was away, he made some drug connections. He became the kingpin of Harlem, making lots of money. So we had lots of money. No more sewing up our shoes, no more Franks. We had steak. We could go wherever we wanted to. We flew everywhere. He owned 2 clubs, one in Harlem and one in Atlanta, Georgia. And weekends, he had entertainment, and it was high entertainment. Y'all are young, so a lot of y'all may not know Gladys Knight and the Pips, the Temptations, Slappy White, and the list goes on. And so we flew back from New York to Atlanta with the clubs. Because I took the bookkeeping in school, he sort of put me in charge of watching the books. But then I couldn't really watch the books because the main bookkeeper was his girlfriend. So when I tried to tell him how she was stealing, he took her word over mine. 1971, I'm pregnant again, and now my mom says, you got to get out of here. There will be no more babies with no husband. And she married me and my husband off in about 30 days. I had over 1,000 guests. You know, money was flying then, so everything was nice. And Bishop said one time that we say I do. We really don't know the extent of that. We were 21. What did we know? In the intro of this, I got introduced to cocaine. And that's what happens when you're a parent and you don't train your kids the right way. So the very drug that you sold to other people, it became my crutch. So I'm sniffing occasionally because back in the 60s, 70s, it was an elite drug. You had a nice gold vial that it was in and a gold tube to you know, sniff it with. And I did it on occasion. But then after I got married, things got heavy, money got slow. My husband wasn't a hustler like my dad was. So money got scarce, things began to change. I have 2 kids, a lot of responsibility, and a husband that's also a womanizer. He was good looking, so I understood why they cared about him. But when I met him during the same time that I was pregnant. So he was there for my son. And my son's father was gone. You know, my dad ran him off. He was gone, and because he went to jail and the rape, his family, he was just removed from me. And the reason I cared so much for my husband is because he loved my son. And I knew that I couldn't be with anybody if they didn't love my child. So we're married, we have these kids. Then we have child number 3, which is Kawana. And when I look back, the things that we say to our children, I had her as a result of him having another baby. I had 2 boys, this girl had a girl. And so I'm getting pregnant now, and I better have a girl or you're going to die. That was my mindset. Before I got pregnant, I had syphilis. And so the doctors were worried that if she'd be born blind or crippled or whatever. But she came forth, beautiful baby girl. Now I got 3 kids. A weary husband that makes money sometimes. He gambles, he plays cards. He was really a true identity of a hustler because he did everything. But it was never enough. Sometimes we would have a lot, and then for a lot of times we didn't have anything. And I'm constantly using the cocaine. We break up some 20 years into our marriage. And I tell young people all the time, stick it out, work it out with your mate. Don't give up. I preach that all the time. But we didn't have any center. We had no core. We had no examples. So we fought, we argued, and I was a crazy wife. I was a wife that would go out and turn the bar upside down if I saw him talking to anybody. So, and curse. He used to say sometimes, I would rather you hit me than open that filthy mouth of yours. But I didn't know any better. And I was angry from the way my dad used to brutalize my mother. So my thing was, no man's ever going to do anything to me. And I told him getting married, if you ever touch me, you're going to die. Because we couldn't intervene with my mother. She wouldn't allow us. And to watch her get beat, take her to the emergency was very traumatic. So now we're separated because of my infidelity. He did everything he wanted to do, but the first time I did it, he said he couldn't survive that. So he left. And now I'm left with 4 children because then I had my baby son who was born out of a product of, let's have another baby. It'll keep our marriage together. And there goes Rashad. I just thank God that I have 4 wonderful children out of all of them.